Welcome and thank you everyone for being here today. I'm Christina Warner, Bergen Family Archivist and Interim Executive Director for NAHA. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. I'm especially excited to introduce Professor Kari Lee Dorr and her students, who will be sharing insights from their course and their work exploring the life of Ole Rølvaag. We're gathered at a meaningful moment, the eve of Rølvaag's 150th birthday. Many of you already know the profound impact he had on Norwegian American culture, as well as his deep connection to NAHA. He wasn't just a literary figure, he was one of NAHA's founders and served in many roles over the years, including as archivist. Rolvaag's journey to America started in 1896 at just 20 years old when he left Norway for America, planning to work, save money, and eventually return home. But the reality he encountered was far more complex than the American dream he had heard about. After years of hard labor on his uncle's farm, he began to recognize not just the physical challenges immigrants faced, but also the profound spiritual and cultural losses experienced by Norwegian Americans. Here at NAHA, we're fortunate to care for the Ole Rølvaag papers, a rich and expansive collection of manuscripts, letters, photographs, and more that help tell his story. In 2022, with support from a grant from the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, we began digitizing portions of this collection, making it accessible to researchers around that world. And that work continues. Scholars are still uncovering new perspectives on Rølvaag's life, ideas, and relationships within the Norwegian American community. This semester, Professor Dorer's students have immersed themselves in that very work, reading, researching, and engaging directly with Rølvaag's personal papers. With that, I'll turn things over to Professor Dorer, who will tell you more about the class and introduce her students. As we go along, please feel free to share your questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of the webinar.
Well, thank you for joining us. This is a really fun, unique opportunity to bring together my two worlds of the Norwegian Department and my work with NAHA as a board member. And so here you have four students that are joining us today, and they are four students that are in our upper level Norwegian course, and there's a total of 10. The other six presented to people in person today here in the Rølvaag Library. Each year we have a different topic for our upper level Norwegian class so that it really encourages students to work on those upper level skills of language learning. And so this year the topic was, or is, we're still in the middle of it, America Fever. And we are looking about or looking into all types of migration from Norway to North America, and decided because it is a perfect opportunity to commemorate Rølvaag that we would do a project tied to that. And usually when I do projects, as you guys know, we do individual projects, but this was a very different class project in that it was one final product the entire class was making. And so the result of that you will get to see in a few minutes. But before that, I'd like you each to introduce yourselves. You can tell your name, maybe where you're from, why you decided to take Norwegian, and if you had any knowledge of Rølvaag before this course.
Cool. Hi, I'm James Taylor. I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri. I am a junior student here at St. Olaf of Norwegian, Nordic Studies, and Biology. I chose to take Norwegian because my family comes from Sweden and Norway, and I had no knowledge of Rølvaag before coming here. But then I learned about the library being named after him, and then this class.
I'm Kaya Martinson. I'm majoring in Norwegian and environmental studies. I'm from St. Paul, and I knew a little bit about Rølvaag from some of my earlier classes here, but it was fun to get to learn much more about him.
Yeah, I'm Berit Martinson. I major in Norwegian. Oh my goodness. I'm from St. Paul, Minnesota. There's so many things, but I'm getting all of them now. And I knew a little bit about Rølvaag again from previous classes I had taken at St. Olaf.
Hi, my name is Langston Chafee. I'm from Ardent Hills, Minnesota. I'm also a Norwegian major here at St. Olaf. And I knew a little bit about Rølvaag actually from a class I took in Norway when I did my study abroad there, my junior year. But it's nice to learn more about him here.
Yeah. And maybe before we start the video, do you guys want to explain how we divided it up into parts? And does one of you want to explain kind of how we did it logistically?
Sure. There were 5 main sections of the video, following like sections of Rølvaag's life. So we did that in groups of 2, and we did research in the archives, and we wrote them out. So you hear 10 different voices in the video, and that's us reading from our parts that we wrote for the video. And we also had some individual roles for the video. So I was in charge of sound. Langston and Barrett did some of the photography, and James was part of the editing team.
Yeah. Great. So I think we will shift over to playing the video. And Christina, you can help us with that, right?
Yes, I can definitely do that. And if there are any issues with that, just pop something in chat if people are having any issues. But I think it should be fine.
Om du en student ved St. Olaf, kjenner du sikkert navnet Rølvaag. Men kjenner du mannen bak navnet som står på skiltet til biblioteket? Kanskje har du lest eller hørt om boka I de dager, eller på engelsk Giants in the Earth. Men hva vet du om forfatteren som skrev den? Om du interessert I norsk-amerikansk innvandring og historie I det hele tatt, må du lære om Ole Edvard Rølvaag. I dette prosjektet, Rølvaag, liv og ettermæle, vil vi undersøke Rølvaags liv I 5 deler. Først får vi et blikk inn I oppveksten hans, og da ser vi hvordan og hvorfor Rølvaag reiste til USA. Videre går vi dypere inn I studiene hans ved St. Olaf og I Norge. Til slutt snakker vi om inntrykket han hadde ved St. Olaf I norskavdelingen og NAHA, og senere I livet med bøkene hans. NAHA den Norwegian American Historical Association, som var dannet I 1925 ved St. Olaf. Den var dannet for å samle inn og beholde norsk-amerikanske historier, særlig historier om innvandring. Alt det som ligger I arkivene I dag ville ikke eksistert uten Rølvaag og hans arbeid. Gjennom NAHA og bøkene hans forandret Rølvaag hvordan folk oppfatter den norsk-amerikanske innvandringsopplevelsen. Det derfor vi snakker om og hvorfor Rølvaag så viktig I dag.
For å forstå hvem Ole Rølvaag var og hva som påvirket ham, så må vi begynne med barndommen hans. Han ble født 22. april 1876 på Dønne I Nord-Norge på en gård. Rølvaag hadde 8 søsken, men flere døde som småbarn. Rølvaag ble oppvokst I et fiskermiljø, og familien hans lærte tidlig at han ikke ville være fisker. Det viktig å påpeke dette, fordi det var et stort stridspunkt mellom Rølvaag og faren hans, Peder. Peder trodde ikke at sønnen sin kunne bli lærer eller skriver, selv om dette var Rølvaags drøm. Dette var på grunn av lesevanskene hans, og fordi faren hans ville at Rølvaag skulle bli fisker, slik som alle de andre I familien. I motsetning til det som Peder mente før, sendte han et brev til sønnen sin I 1905 etter at Rølvaag hadde skaffet seg et liv I USA. Brevet forklarte at Peder var egentlig stolt over Rølvaag og hans prestasjoner. Om det ikke spesielt til min person, kan ikke jeg si så mye når jeg kan se at det går deg vel, og at du har hatt å vinne frem med ditt strev så at både dine og Guds tanker måtte være overensstemmende. Da går det godt, og da kan du gå både trøstig og sikkert frem.
Rølvaag begynte med å reise til Lofoten og fiske hvert år da han var 14 år. Lofotfiske var en bra måte å tjene penger på. Imidlertid hadde jobben høy risiko. I 1893 opplevde Rølvaag en veldig voldsom storm i Lofoten. Flere venner døde, og dette hadde en stor effekt på ham. Det som foregikk i Lofoten medførte at han ville flytte til Amerika. Han sendte brev til onkelen som bodde i Amerika, og så gikk han i gang med å reise. Ifølge dagboken hans etterlot han gården, mora, kjæresten og søsken, men han belyste at han kom til å savne mora og kjæresten mest. Rett før Rølvaag forlot Norge, skrev han i sin dagbok: «Akk om jeg kunne nå hjem til mor i kveld, og så til en annen, men jeg holder nok for meget av dem, derfor får jeg nok ikke se dem mer. Men derfor råder jo alene Gud, men så håper jeg dog å treffe dem her i dette liv og bli lykkelig med dem.» Allikevel forlot han alt han kjente og gikk ombord et dampskip som het DS Norge den 6. august 1896. Dette betegnet begynnelsen av et nytt liv i Amerika, og han vinket farvel til livet hans som fisker.
Etter at Rølvaag ankom Amerika, tok han toget til Union County i Sør-Dakota for å finne onkelen sin. Reisen var ikke enkel, imidlertid han holdt ut. Da han gikk langs veien mot onkelens gård, befant han seg plutselig foran noe han aldri hadde sett før, en stor slange. I Norge finnes det bare 3 slangearter: hoggorm, bøorm og slettsnok. Men hoggorm er den eneste giftige arten, mens alle slanger i Norge er relativt små. Er det på grunn av det at Rølvaag naturligvis ble veldig redd da han for første gang så en stor amerikansk slange. Onkelens gård lå i Elk Point i Sør-Dakota. Rølvaag arbeidet der i nesten 2 år. Han forstod raskt at livet i Amerika ikke var det han hadde forventet. Praien var flat og vid, og det var veldig annerledes fra fjordene og havet han hadde vokst opp med i Nord-Norge.
I løpet av denne tiden møtte Rølvaag presten sin, som hjalp ham med å ta et viktig valg. Presten antydet at han bør fortsette utdannelsen sin. I 1898, da Rølvaag var 22 år gammel, begynte han å studere ved Augustana Academy i Canton, Sør-Dakota. Dette var begynnelsen på en helt ny vei for ham. I tillegg i Sør-Dakota ble Rølvaag kjent med Berdal-familien. Berdal-familien var norske innvandrere som hadde slått seg ned på prærien på 1800-tallet. I 1863 hadde de sluttet seg til andre norske familier og dannet en karavane av 11 overdekkede vogner fra Fillmore County i Minnesota til Dakota Territory. Rølvaag kjente seg igjen i historien deres. De hadde også forlatt Norge for å starte et nytt liv, akkurat som han. Denne perioden i Sør-Dakota påvirket Rølvaag på mange måter. Han opplevde på nært hold hva det vil si å være norsk innvandrer i Amerika, og denne erfaringen skulle bli viktig for bøkene han senere skrev. Dessuten var karakterene hans inspirert av Berdal-familien.
Rølvaag studerte ved St. Olaf College fra 1901 til 1905 og tok kurs i flere forskjellige fag, men dokumenter påpeker et av favorittfagene hans, Ibsen. Dette er kanskje årsaken som medførte han til å senere undervise et kurs om det samme temaet. Da Rølvaag var student ved St. Olaf, begynte han å skrive fiksjon. Et eksempel er romanen som het Nils og Astrid. Den ble skrevet i 3 eller mer skrivebøker over hans siste år ved St. Olaf. Egentlig er den siste skriveboka uferdig. Det ble kalt hans tapte roman. I tillegg vet vi at han lot en professor, Gerhard Graham, bidra til redigeringen av skrivingen hans mens han var student.
Rølvaag publiserte flere kortere fiksjontekster i avisen Manitou Messenger, som i dag heter The Olaf Messenger. De fleste av disse tekstene blir skrevet på engelsk, men han oversatte dikt til norsk fordi en stor del av studentene snakket norsk på denne tiden. Flere av de engelske tekstene hans var korte historier som omhandlet temaer om familie og kultur. Avisen avdekket også at han var en del av studentorganisasjoner som Normanna, Gamma Delta Debating Society, Luther League og Societas Latina. Han var også en klassehistorien i løpet av sitt siste år ved St. Olaf, og ga en tal om skoleavslutning hans. Alt i alt var Rølvaag et veldig aktiv og viktig medlem av St. Olaf-fellesskapet.
Etter at han ble ferdig med å studere ved St. Olaf, reiste Rølvaag tilbake til Norge, som ikke var uvanlig for norsk-amerikanske innvandrere på denne tiden. Her skulle han studere ved Universitetet i Kristiania, som i dag heter Universitetet i Oslo.
I løpet av denne tiden sendte han brev tilbake til sin kjæreste Jenny Berdal. Mengden som forblir et stort monument til kjærlighet mellom de to. Mens han likte å bo i Norge igjen, reiste han tilbake til Northfield etter bare ett år, som var i stor grad på grunn av hans nære forhold til folk som Jenny.
Da han kom tilbake fra Norge, underviste Rølvaag på norsk avdelingen ved St. Olaf i 1906. 4 år senere fikk han mastergrad fra St. Olaf. Han underviste ved St. Olaf i over 20 år. I arkivene fant vi lister av bøkene som norsk avdelingen formidlet i kursene sine. For eksempel var Holvegs Bienusbok, Norsk lesebok, det 3., Wergelands store dikt og Et dukkehjem et par titler vi kan fremheve. I tillegg vil vi påpeke at Rølvaag var forfatteren av Norsk lesebok. Mens han begynte å danne hans eget inntrykk ved St. Olaf, begynte Rølvaag et annet eventyr samtidig.
I 1908 gifte Rølvaag seg med Jenny Berdal. Rølvaag og Jenny fikk 4 barn. Olav Arnhjolt, Ella Valborg, Karl Fridtjof og Paul Gunnar. Dessverre døde Olaf Arnhjolt i 1915. Det var vanskelig for Rølvaag, fordi mora hans døde også da han var ung. Barna til Rølvaag sa han var en god far. Han lekte med familien sin og fokuserte på forsterkning av forholdene de hadde sammen. Dessuten integrerte han barna sine i livet sitt, og barna var veldig glade i ham. Han var en aktiv del av livet til barna og barnebarna sine. Om det var å undervise dem, dra på hytta og svømme i innsjøene i Nord-Minnesota. Allikevel fokuserte Rølvaag mye på bøkene sine, og han inkluderte det han lærte fra verden rundt ham og kulturen han underviste til barna sine. Derimot var det ikke bare barna hans som lærte om norsk kultur eller språk. Rølvaag syntes alle de norske innvandrerne bør lære om kulturen sin.
Ifølge Ole Rølvaag-papirene som ligger i NAHA, sier norsk avdelingen, every student of Norwegian parentage ought, as far as possible, to learn the language of his race. The reasons are quite obvious. A knowledge of Norwegian will be of great practical value to the student, no matter what his position in life may be. The study of the language, literature, and history of the people from which he is sprung should be of inestimable value to him culturally. Dette understreker hvor mange ved St. Olaf, særlig i norsk avdelingen, syntes norsk var så knyttet til identitet, og hvor viktig det var å opprettholde språket i USA. Dette kan vi også se med dannelsen av NAHA ved St. Olaf i 1925. Rølvaag var den første generalsekretæren og arkiveren av NAHA. Han jobbet veldig hardt med å samle inn dokumenter og andre materialer for arkivene. Arbeidet hans representerer hvor dedikert han var til å beskytte norsk språk og identitet i USA.
Rølvaags påvirkning på St. Olav og det norsk-amerikanske samfunn kan ses i dag, fra bygningen og biblioteket på St. Olav, som kalles etter han, til NAHA, som Rølvaag hjalp med å organisere og etablere i 1925. Det han er mest kjent for, er boka Giants in the Earth, som har blitt studert i amerikanske skoler i flere tiår. Dessuten er Giants in the Earth ikke Rølvaags første publiserte bok. Han hadde tidligere publisert bøker på norsk i Amerika, men når det gjelder amerikanske lesere, kan bare en liten del lese norsk. 2 av bøkene hadde en sirkulasjon av 5000 norskspråklige mennesker, men det var ikke nok for å få interesse av norsk utgivere. Giants in the Earth ble først publisert på norsk i Norge i 2 deler, i De dager i 1924 og Riket grunnlegges i 1925. Rølvaag skrev om og belyser innvandreropplevelse, hvordan det var å være nordmenn i Amerika, spesielt på prærien. Boka var veldig populær i Norge, og Rølvaag fikk brev fra flere store navn i norsk litteratur, med komplimenter over i De dager. I 1926 fikk Rølvaag et brev fra amerikansk journalist og forfattere Lincoln Colcord, som omhandlet oversetting av I De dager og Riket grunnlegges. Colcord lærte om Rølvaags bøker fra en artikkel i avisen Minneapolis Journal. Ifølge Colcord i et brev til Eugene Saxton, som var en redaktør på utgivere Harper & Brothers, Rølvaag og bøkene sine var a certain combination of facts and forces that go to make up one of those unaccountable American successes.
I tillegg til oversetting fra norsk måtte Giants in the Earth endres litt for amerikanske lesere. Norske lesere trengte informasjon om Amerika for å forstå boka, og det var akkurat det samme for amerikanske lesere når det gjelder Norge. Mens Colcord mente at Rølvaag var nesten flytende på engelsk, samtykket han på å finne noen mer kjent med idiomatiske engelsk. Oversetting resulterte i at Giants in the Earth ble publisert i Amerika i 1927, og fant mye suksess. Rølvaag ble veldig populær og respektert i norsk-amerikansk litteratur, og mange spør etter om han kunne gi sine tanker over andre bøker, eller kom og snakke med studenter. Giants in the Earth var en del av amerikanske læreplaner i flere tiår, og har blitt til en amerikansk klassisk. Alt i alt var Ole Rølvaag en viktig figur i både Norge og Amerika. Fra den første reisen hans fra Dynne til Sør-Dakota, til å studere og undervise ved St. Olaf, til å skrive så mange ikoniske bøker som i dag, hadde han et interessant liv som er verdt å lære om. Hvis dere vil lære mer om Rølvaag, vi har lenket til noen kilder som var hjelpsomme for oss, eller man kan utforske NAHA sin nettside hvis man vil se mer arkivinformasjon. Takk så mye for at du sa på filmen vår, og vi håper at du nyttet å lære om Rølvaag.
Great. Well, that was the first time anybody online has seen it. So that's, yeah, I thought you guys did an excellent job. And I think what we're going to do now is transition to asking you a few questions. So I'll start off with the first, and then I know Christina has some questions for you too. But my question for you is, you were looking at different parts of his life. You were each focused on different parts of his life, but at the same time, you learn some pieces from your classmates of the things that they were researching. So, what stuck out to you the most? How do you feel that his immigrant experience, his own experience, his life experience, shaped his writing?
It was definitely interesting to learn about his experiences in Norway, because what I focused on was mainly his books and sort of his legacy, which was mostly in the States. So it was really interesting to get to learn about first his childhood there, and how that impacted his decision to come to the United States, um, as well as a little bit about why he went back, and that sort of period of his life.
I mostly just have the same thoughts of I've learned more about what he did here in the States. So it was interesting to learn more about his life back in Norway and his childhood of things that I hadn't really learned about before.
I thought it was interesting how I learned a little bit about how up to that point there had been sort of a narrative of the expansion and settling of the Western frontier in America up to that time, and how his book was, I think it really respected the characters that he wrote. So he portrayed them as really hardworking individuals, but he also sort of cast off the screen that had been thrown up about how ideal it was to go out and live on the prairie, but when in fact it was really, really hard work and hard labor, and it demanded a lot. Like, it exacted a huge toll on these characters. Um, and I think obviously, he grew up in a fishing village, and I think he saw that how heavy nature can be, and the toll it can extract on people who are out living on these fringes of society.
Yeah. And his experience with the Birdall family in that way inspired a lot of his characters in Giants in the Earth, in showing truly how difficult the experience was and not romanticizing it as seen previously.
Yeah. And why do you think he chose to write in Norwegian rather than English for much of his work?
I will say when me and Kaya were doing our part and looking at a lot of these letters that he had back and forth with like Colcord about the translation of Giants in the Earth, I can't quite remember what the quote is exactly, but I recall that he said something about how something along the lines that when he writes in English, he feels like he can do it and like write, but it feels like flat. Like it doesn't feel like he's able to convey the same things that he wants to convey that he could in Norwegian.
That's how I feel when I try to write in Norwegian. I can imagine that, when you're trying to write a story, it's not just about like putting words down. You're trying to capture something and capture an idea. And it's definitely going to be easiest to do that in a language that you're most familiar with.
Yeah, words that are synonyms have implications to each word. They don't all just mean the exact same thing. And it's much more easy to convey that in your own language, your first language, than it is in any language following.
We also saw how important it was to him to hang on to his roots and to value where he came from and Norwegian culture. So for him, I imagine writing in Norwegian was another way of sort of preserving that and honoring his Norwegian identity.
Well, that makes me think of a different kind of tangent of a question, like going back to your own self and your own studying of language. There was this great quote that one of your classmates read about the practical value of learning Norwegian. I think there's a lot of people that pause when we tell them, what language we speak. So what has studying Norwegian, what value has that been to you guys? That was not a question you were expecting, I know, but.
It's like fun and I like it. There's that kind of value. It's not like the most practical language to learn. In my conversations with Norwegians, they'll ask me like, why do you know this language? This is not the most like helpful language to learn. And I still don't really have an answer for them. It just kind of happened. But it's nice to be able to go to Norway and really like immerse myself in the country and understand all of the signs and stuff.
Yeah. I think learning an extra language and then sort of immersing yourself in that culture brings a really big value in terms of like just understanding who you are as a person in a global sense. Just so, because I think in the US we really get a lot of sort of a bubble because a lot of stuff is made for us. But when you step outside in a way that I think you can only really do when you at least mostly understand a foreign language of that bubble, I think you bring some of that back in with you when you come back to America or back to your media lifestyle in English in the Anglosphere. So I find a lot of value in Norwegian. I also speak a little bit of French, and I think it's sort of a compounding thing. Or once you understand these cultures in relation to each other, it provides a deeper understanding of who you are and who you can become. I think it sort of has a lot of value in that for me.
Yeah, and also sort of thinking about that and thinking about Rølvaag and how he would prefer to write in Norwegian and that sort of thing. Different languages have words for concepts that don't really exist in other languages, or to explain it, you'd have to use like a whole explanation rather than just one word. And so learning different languages, you're introduced to all of these different ideas and concepts that are different than what you have in your own culture.
Yeah, and I know for a lot of people from Minnesota and the upper Midwest, as well as people all over the United States, have Norwegian, Swedish, Danish, etc. heritage and feel a connection to the language, even if it hasn't been spoken in their families in 3 generations. It helps you understand your own family history, and even for people who don't have that family history, it helps you understand others. And I think that that's important.
Yeah, and that's kind of how we started the course. The very first assignment I had you do, if you remember back, was to think of or to find out one family story about your family's immigrant experience. And it didn't have to be Norwegian, but it was starting with that base. So, yeah.
Great. So this question kind of goes along with that. How do Rølvaag's themes relate to modern immigrant experiences?
This is a really good question because there's a lot of similarities, but there's also a lot of differences. For one, it's definitely different to, immigrate as sort of a white Norwegian than it is to immigrate as a person of color today. But, there's still language barriers. There's still, the difficulty of leaving your home. I suppose today you can stay in contact with, your family and your friends from home more easily. But a lot of immigrant themes are about leaving home and finding yourself in a new place that you're just not familiar with, and trying to hold on to where you've come from while also making space for where you are. So there are plenty of connections.
I'm wondering if we should open up to questions from our viewers.
Yeah, there's a few in there. So let's see here. Kristen is curious to know who helped translate Rølvaag's novels into English, as was being talked about in the video. Did you learn about that at all?
So it varied. I know that Lincoln Colcord just helped with Giants in the Earth and then didn't help with any other translation. And how he helped with Giants in the Earth was essentially Rølvaag had friends who did a like literal translation of Giants in the Earth, which was then given to Colcord, and then he sort of did editing to help convey the more like, oh, what's the word?
To make it flow.
Yeah, to make it flow, to get some of the more like descriptive things in the imagery. Yes, thank you, Langston, across. And so he did sort of that. And then we couldn't really find as much about his other books. So I don't know if they figured out a better process than the just literal translation and then someone else sort of editing it. But that's the process that we found was there was the literal translation and then sort of the editing.
Yeah, I think there was a letter too where Colcord had written to Rølvaag and was like, if you see me like crossing stuff out and rewriting it several times, it's not because I like don't think what you wrote was good. I'm just trying to figure out how to best say it. So we can tell that he had a lot of respect for Rølvaag.
Yeah, and Kyle wanted to know what was the biggest surprise in researching Rølvaag?
He wrote a lot of stuff. He was a prolific writer, which I think you can sort of, when I first learned about him, I think the first thing everyone learns is that he wrote Giants in the Earth, which I knew a little bit about at the time, before all this, but it was really intriguing. Like, this guy had a lot of thoughts and he had these really deep connections with a lot of people, which I thought was just, it made him seem more real to me as a person, I guess, rather than just a historical figure. Like, this was a guy who came to St. Olaf and he wrote a bunch of stuff here, and then he graduated and he wrote a bunch of stuff there. And I kind of thought to myself when I was reading it, like, I wonder if he ever thought or even could conceive of the idea that like we'd be reading his words, 100 years later, at the same college where he studied. That was really interesting to me.
Or learning his
language, right? That people were still interested in that kind of stuff.
And like sort of bouncing off of that, just a thing about Giants in the Earth. He wrote Giants in the Earth is a trilogy if we are going with the English translations, and it's 4 books in the Norwegian, but you only ever hear about Giants in the Earth. So I didn't know before this that there are actually 2 books following that, his most famous one. And then also in terms of how much he wrote a lot of letters. When we were looking at things in the archive, it was just like so many letters back and forth. And so that was just a lot to see of how much he wrote to people all the time. And it was also fun to read some of the letters because some of them were silly. There was one where a friend or whatever was, I think, trying to make a joke about how they were eating, was it a grapefruit?
Yeah.
Grapefruit.
It was a grapefruit, and because the English translation of one of his novels was like pure gold or whatever, and so they were joking because that's what the brand of grapefruit was called. And then in the next letter, they included the label of the grapefruit.
I believe they proposed a slogan for the book that was like, read it with your grapefruit, which was very confusing. But it was a lot of fun to look through the letters for sure. And it was really cool to see how much respect other people had for him. I knew he was, a pretty, big figure. But like looking through his letters, there's plenty of people asking him to come speak at events or, meet them or do like something for them for the writers group. And like even outside of like the sort of Norwegian American like sort of community, or even like outside of really like higher education, there were people asking him to come speak at like clubs for writing. So like he had a really big impact, and he was really well connected in the literary world.
Yeah. Not to be the 4th person speaking about this, but the letters and just the prolific writing is so impressive, especially in this day and age. I know I have very rarely written a physical letter to other people, and I don't know about other people my age, or even in generations previous. We don't send letters to each other as much anymore, and kind of reading all of these letters, just about various different things to various different people, made me think maybe I should start writing letters to my friends, or to my enemies if I really wanted to.
I have to say, you're giving me ideas for your final exam.
Good ideas, I hope.
Yeah. But I also have to say, like, I thought it was equally as interesting to see some of the mail that wasn't so supportive.
Yeah.
Because some of the folders are labeled fan mail, and I didn't understand like why it was labeled that until I read some of those, and I thought those were hilarious about people just not agreeing with him and and didn't mince words when they told him that he was, not right. So, yeah.
There are also quite a few postcards, and those were fun to see.
Mhm.
Sent to his family.
Oh, also now I'm thinking about the letters. It was entertaining that some of the letters, you'd flip the letter and you're like, oh, someone just took a random other like piece of paper, like
their taxes or something.
yeah, or like something, or like they sent a letter to a factory or something, and they're like, just take this, and then wrote on the back of it.
Random pieces of paper.
Yeah.
Reuse.
So if you could ask Rølvaag one question, what would it be?
That is a really good question. We've been really prepared to answer questions, and I have to think of questions to ask. I think I'd maybe want to know if he ever thought about going back to Norway and staying, like when he came to South Dakota, or when he first came over, if he found that it was really, difficult and he felt like going back. I mean, by the time he did go back to study for a little bit, he obviously had connections and, a life in the States, but, it's a hard experience. So I'd be curious.
I think I'd be interested to maybe know more about like his teaching career or things like that, because he ended up teaching at St. Olaf because St. Olaf, gave him a job, and they're like, hey, if you go get your degree, if you go to the University of Oslo, we'll give you a job. And so he took it because, jobs are hard to find. But it would be interesting to be like, what would you have chosen to do that if you had more options to go to St. Olaf, or would you have chosen to if you were like fully able to fully write full time, or just learn more about that?
I guess I'd ask him if you were back, I guess, in the modern age, what he would write about, because I think it would be interesting to see his take on an immigrant story in the current year, just because I think that'd be fascinating to pick his brain about. But maybe he'd do something totally different. He could, I don't know, he could do something with St. Olaf or Norway or the community he came from. I think that'd be what I would want to know about him.
I think I would ask him about burnout, and a lot of modern writers and throughout history, writers have always experienced burnout. And I would want to know how it seems he either combated this or didn't experience this, given how prolific he was. So many letters, so many books.
And the letters too. Like when I think of burnout, I think of all the like, behind the scenes tasks that people don't see someone do. And what was so obvious from what he was doing was going to the post office because somebody would send them their book. They wanted it signed, and for him to write a note in there, and then going to the post office, sending it back to them, like just the time involved.
The post office a lot.
Yeah, I mean, crazy.
Great. And I have one last question for you. How has studying his work changed your understanding of immigrant narratives? Some challenging questions.
I think it's interesting in that a lot of his work and like Giants in the Earth and such is sort of talking more about the hardships of immigration and all these like difficult things and whatever. And at least when I first started learning about immigration to the States when I was much younger, and I've had more of this in college where we've learned about the other side of things, but I think it's interesting to learn more about, and from his perspective, about all of these different challenges and difficulties that there were when they immigrated over.
I think to me something that's interesting is how it just provided a very different take on an immigrant story, and it was far enough back, like it was temporarily removed enough that I felt like it was really. I thought the through lines between the immigrant stories of yesteryear and the immigrant stories of today is that there's always going to be people who are looking to change their environment or change their situation for what they perceive to be the better, which was interesting to me because I think I don't know if you guys can speak to this, but I think growing up in the United States and I was born in 2003, so in the modern world, it's there's always been a sort of idea of what it means, like who is an immigrant. And so seeing such a different time and place, but the same character traits, like the same similar people, I guess, was really influential to me in my reading.
Yeah, for me, it's sort of difficult to like find something new in it because I've learned about this like all of the time. I've taken some classes, not even like about Norwegian, that have covered just immigration, to the States in that time period. And so like I'm pretty familiar with that, and particularly as an environmental studies major, the impact that had on like the environment and stuff. Um, but it was interesting to see how much he really prioritized like clinging to the language, um, which is something I think you see both encouraged and discouraged today. There's definitely large groups of people who like only like tolerate immigration so long as it comes with this idea of assimilation, where, in order to immigrate, you need to fully commit and fully become, somebody like a citizen of that country, which means giving up your own history. And, for me, we've carried down like Scandinavian traditions through my family, but, we don't really speak the language anymore. Or have like a lot of that. So I kind of figured as a group, Norwegian immigrants had sort of like held on to lutefisk and left and called it a day. So it's cool to see that. And I think that's something really important to preserve for immigrants today too.
I agree. Yeah. My schooling in high school and prior, we didn't really talk about immigration at my high school, in my school district. It wasn't a topic that was really brought up. So coming to college and actually learning about it, learning about historical and modern immigration has been amazing to fully like try and understand the world. And like I mentioned earlier, my family comes from Norway and Sweden. However, we brought nothing with us. We brought one cookie recipe that has survived, and that is it.
Is it a good cookie recipe?
No. Well, I can't eat it. It has nuts in it.
It's a James.
I'm very allergic
Not
to nuts.
James.
So you're betraying your ancestors.
I truly am. I can't have all the fun food.
Yeah.
But we've lost everything. We don't speak the language. We don't even have records of the language being spoken past Chicago. So it's been truly amazing seeing that from a different perspective and from the perspective of holding on to that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the unique things with this class is that you get to hear different stories. And so I'm wondering if you might say a few words about how this fit into some of the other things that you've been learning about. And we've been focusing on this now for several weeks, so it might be like not fresh in your memory, but can you think of some of the other types of stories that we've...
Well, Rølvaag didn't kill anyone.
Yes. Okay, so you're going to have to...
So he has a pretty different immigration story from the serial killer Bell Guinness, who killed people.
For money.
Around the same, a little,
Insurance
a little
fraud.
later than Rølvaag. So Rølvaag didn't do that, which is good. I'm struggling to think of the other ones we've learned about.
You all have the different podcasts, so you all had some slightly different.
Barrett and I were really focused on the murder.
See, I had Tirana, so I had the one of the first guys to do an organized labor movement, and in Norway, I believe, or the first one to do a organized labor movement in Norway. Yeah, a very different guy for sure. He was he was also something of a writer and a guy who wanted to spread his ideas. Of course, his were a little bit more radical at the time, and he was uh, not approved of by the state. And so he did not get quite a warm reception to his ideas like Rølvaag did.
I learned about Norwegians in New Amsterdam prior to it becoming New York. And that was very interesting to me as there was still a Norwegian community, which, again, I've said before, my family lost that community. So seeing how that was maintained, again, very cool, and just that connection.
And we've done Leif Erikson. We will be looking at the Danish West Indies. We'll be looking at a newer New York next week. So yeah, a little bit of everything.
Well, we're getting to the end of our time here, and we answered all of the questions in the chat. So I want to thank everyone for being with us today and for all of you answering our questions and creating that wonderful video. It's been truly an honor and really great to have you digging into the Rølvaag papers. It's always a blast to see what students latch onto. You think like things that are different that I maybe wouldn't have looked at. So it's been a lot of fun working with everyone and just seeing what came out of it. So again, thank you. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to send us some emails, and the videos that the student created will be online on the NAHA YouTube page shortly after this. So I hope everyone has a great evening. Bye.